Sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones that have learned never to trust. Sometimes the fiercest souls are just protecting wounds that never fully healed. In Copper Ridge, everyone knew Sierra Hart as the wild woman. No man could tame, a woman with fists like iron and a temper that cleared saloons. But one quiet cowboy saw something different. When he rode into town, he didn't see a challenge to conquer or a spectacle to witness. He saw a woman worth understanding. What he did next shocked the entire frontier. He refused to fight her. Instead, he held her hands, not to control her, but to steady her. And in that single moment, something shifted. What would make the wildest woman in the West finally let her guard down? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Copper Ridge sat in a valley where the Montana Territory met the Wyoming Plains, a town that had grown from a mining camp into something more permanent, but never quite respectable. The main street ran wide enough for 2 wagons to pass, lined with wooden buildings that leaned slightly, as if tired from holding up against the wind that came down from the mountains every evening. The saloon anchored one end, the general store the other, and between them stood the trading post that had belonged to the Hart family for nearly 20 years. Sierra Hart stood behind the counter of that trading post at dawn, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she sorted through a shipment of dry goods. She was 28 years old, tall for a woman, with dark hair she kept pulled back in a braid that fell past her shoulders. Her face would have been called beautiful if it weren't for the hardness around her eyes, the set of her jaw that spoke of someone always ready for the next challenge. She wore men's trousers under a long skirt she could hike up when needed, and a shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. On her hands were a pair of worn leather fighting gloves, fingerless, scarred from years of use. Thought the gloves had been her father's once. Thomas Hart had been a boxer in his younger days. Before he'd come west with his pregnant wife seeking a new start, he'd taught Sierra to fight when she was barely tall enough to reach his waist. After her mother died, bringing a stillborn son into the world. A woman alone needs to know how to protect herself, he'd said, wrapping those oversized gloves around her small hands, especially out here. She'd been 16 when the drifters came. 3 of them, drunk and mean, looking for easy money. They burst into the trading post after closing, not knowing Thomas Hart was still in the back room doing inventory. Sierra remembered every detail of that night, the smell of whiskey and unwashed bodies, her father's shout, the sound of the gunshot that ended everything. Thomas had killed 2 of them before the third one's bullet found him. Sierra had finished what her father started, beating the last man unconscious with an iron skillet before running for the marshal dot. By the time help arrived, Thomas Hart was gone, his pocket watch still clutched in his hand. The watch had stopped at exactly 8:47, the moment the bullet struck. Sierra had kept it, never bothering to wind it again. Some things, once broken, were meant to stay that way. That had been 12 years ago. In the years since, Sierra had run the trading post alone, refusing every offer of help, every expression of pity, every attempt by well-meaning townspeople to soften her edges. She'd also refused every suitor, and there had been many. Men saw her as a challenge, a wild thing to be conquered. They came with sweet words and bold declarations, and she sent them away with bruised egos and sometimes bruised faces. The town had learned to give her a wide berth. They respected her business sense. She ran the best stock trading post in 3 counties, but they whispered about her behind closed doors. Unnatural, some of the women said. Needs a firm hand, some of the men muttered. Sierra heard it all and cared about none of it. She'd built walls high enough that nothing could reach her, and she intended to keep it that way. Morning, Sierra, came a warm voice from the doorway. Sierra looked up to see Martha Cunningham, the closest thing she had to a friend in Copper Ridge. Martha ran the boarding house next door. A widow herself, though she'd handled her grief differently than Sierra. Where Sierra had hardened, Martha had softened, becoming the town's unofficial grandmother, dispensing wisdom and fresh bread in equal measure. Martha. Sierra nodded, her voice neutral but not unkind. Usual order? Please, dear. And maybe a moment of your time when you're done with those beans. Sierra's hands paused. Martha didn't ask for her time often, which meant this was important. She finished sorting the last of the shipment, wiped her hands on her apron, and gestured to the 2 chairs near the stove. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that only comes between people who've known each other long enough to not need constant words. Martha's weathered hands folded in her lap, and Sierra waited. She'd learned patience from her father, even if she'd never learned softness. There's talk of trouble coming, Martha said finally, her voice low. Clayton Marsh has been making noises again. Sierra's jaw tightened. Clayton Marsh was the son of the wealthiest rancher in the territory, a man who decided 2 years ago that Sierra would make a fine trophy wife. She'd rejected him publicly, forcefully, and repeatedly. He hadn't taken it well. Clayton's always making noise, Sierra said, like a rooster that doesn't know dawn's already past. Martha's lips twitched, but her eyes remained serious. This is different. He's been saying things, Sierra. Saying you need a man to set you straight. Saying he's the one to do it. Let him say what he wants. Words don't scare me. I know, child. The words turn into actions, and Clayton's got his father's money and his mother's mean streak. That's a dangerous combination. Sierra reached up and touched the fighting gloves at her belt, a gesture so automatic she barely noticed it anymore. I can handle Clayton Marsh. I know you can handle yourself in a fight, Martha said gently. But there are different kinds of battles, Sierra. Some can't be won with your fists. Sierra stood, the conversation clearly over in her mind. I'd been fighting my whole life, Martha. I'm not about to stop now. Martha rose slowly, her knees creaking. She placed a weathered hand on Sierra's arm, and Sierra allowed it, though her body remained tense. I just worry, dear, that you've been fighting so long you've forgotten there might be another way. After Martha left, Sierra returned to her work, but the words lingered like smoke. Another way. As if there had ever been another option for someone like her. As if the world had offered her anything but hardship and loss. As if gentleness had ever protected anyone. She pulled out her father's pocket watch from the drawer where she kept it, running her thumb over the cracked crystal face. 8:47. The moment everything changed. The moment she learned that love made you vulnerable. That caring about someone gave the world a weapon to use against you. The watch went back in the drawer. Sierra locked it and pocketed the key. Some lessons, once learned, couldn't be unlearned. Some hearts, once hardened, couldn't be softened. Or so she believed, right up until the moment a quiet cowboy rode into Copper Ridge and taught her that everything she thought she knew about strength was wrong. Asterisk. The stranger rode into Copper Ridge 3 days later, just as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the western peaks. Sierra was arranging canned goods in the window display when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. The horse was a good one, a bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and the man in the saddle sat with the kind of ease that spoke of long hours traveling. He was tall, lean rather than broad, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples, though he couldn't have been much past 35. His face had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors, but his eyes, even from a distance, Sierra could see they were unusual, calm, steady, the kind of eyes that seemed to see more than they should. He dismounted in front of the saloon, tied his horse with care, and disappeared inside. Sierra told herself she didn't care, that drifters came and went through Copper Ridge every week, that this one was no different from any other. But something about the way he moved, unhurried and deliberate, stuck with her as she returned to her work. By evening, the entire town was buzzing with talk of the stranger. His name was James Cordell, and he'd come from somewhere in the Dakota Territory. Or maybe further east. The stories varied. What didn't vary was the reputation that had apparently traveled with him. James Cordell was known as the man who never lost. Not that he fought often, people said. In fact, he seemed to go out of his way to avoid confrontation. But when pushed into a corner, when given no other choice, he had a way of turning every situation to his advantage. Not with violence, necessarily, but with something else. Intelligence, strategy, a calm that unnerved his opponents until they made mistakes. Sierra heard the gossip from Big Tom, the saloon owner, when he stopped by for his weekly tobacco order. Tom was a massive man with hands like ham hocks and a surprisingly gentle disposition. He'd seen more bar fights than anyone in Copper Ridge and had strong opinions about men who started them. This Cordell fellow, Tom said, counting out coins onto Sierra's counter, he's different. Sat at the bar for 2 hours, nursed one whiskey, didn't say much, but he was listening. Really listening. You know how most men talk at you. He actually hears what you're saying. Sierra snorted. Sounds like he's either simple or scheming. Neither, I think. Tom pocketed his tobacco and fixed her with a knowing look. He asked about you. Her hand still on the coin she'd been sorting. What about me? Just who you were. What your story was. I told him you ran the trading post, that you'd been here all your life, that you were, well, that you had a reputation for being able to handle yourself. And what did he say to that? Tom's weathered face creased into something between a smile and a frown. He said, I imagine she's had to. Then he asked where he might find work, and we moved on to other topics. After Tom left, Sierra found herself unable to settle. Those 4 words kept circling in her mind. I imagine she's had to. Not judgment, not challenge, not the usual mixture of fascination and fear that men showed when they heard about her. Just understanding. Or the pretense of it, which was somehow worse. She closed the trading post earlier than usual and walked to the saloon, telling herself she needed to see what supplies Big Tom might need for the coming week. It was a thin excuse, and Martha, sitting on her porch as Sierra passed, gave her a look that said she saw right through it. The saloon was fuller than usual for a weeknight, probably because of this stranger. Sierra pushed through the doors and felt the familiar hush that always accompanied her entrance. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they lowered, became more careful. Men shifted to give her room. She spotted James Cordell at a corner table, that worn leather journal open in front of him, a pencil moving across the page. He was sketching something, his head bent in concentration. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't seem to notice the change in the room's atmosphere at all. Sierra walked to the bar, ordered a whiskey she didn't want, and watched him in the mirror behind the bottles. His hand moved with confidence across the page, not the tentative marks of an amateur. Whatever he was drawing, he'd done it before. Sierra Hart, came a slurred voice to her right. Pretty as a picture and twice as dangerous. She turned to find Billy Watson, a ranch hand who worked for Clayton's father. Billy was drunk, which was his usual state after sunset, and mean, which was his natural disposition regardless of sobriety. 3 of his friends stood behind him, all wearing the same stupid grin that men got when they thought they were about to see a show. Move along. Billy, Sierra said, her voice flat. Now why would I want to do that? I'm just being friendly. Trying to welcome you proper-like. He reached for her arm. Sierra caught his wrist before his fingers made contact, twisted it just enough to hurt, and pushed him back into his friends. I said move along. The saloon had gone completely quiet now. This was familiar territory, a dance everyone had seen before. Billy would either back down or escalate, and either way, Sierra would handle it. She always did, but then Billy did something stupid. He came at her, fist pulled back, rage and alcohol making him forget every lesson he'd ever learned about fighting. Sierra sidestepped easily, hooked her foot behind his ankle, and sent him sprawling across the sawdust floor. Anyone else? She asked the room at large, her hand resting on the fighting gloves at her belt. The silence stretched. And then, from the corner, a chair scraped back. James Cordell stood, closed his journal carefully, and walked across the room. Every eye followed him. He didn't look at Billy, still struggling to his feet, or at Billy's friends, tensed and ready. He walked straight to Sierra and stopped an arm's length away. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I wonder if you'd do me the honor of a dance." The request was so unexpected, so completely out of place, that for a moment Sierra could only stare at him. Up close, his eyes were gray, the color of clouds before a storm, and they held something she couldn't quite name. Not pity, not desire. Something else. "There's no music playing," she said finally. "No, there isn't." He didn't look away, didn't seem bothered by her pointed stare or the fact that the entire saloon was watching. "But I'm asking anyway. I don't dance." "Neither do I, usually." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Maybe that's why we'd be well matched." Behind her, Billy was on his feet, angry and humiliated. "She's not dancing with anyone, especially not some drifter who just rolled into town." James finally looked at Billy, and something in his gaze made the younger man take a step back. "I wasn't speaking to you," James said simply. Then he returned his attention to Sierra. "Ma'am?" Sierra felt something dangerous rising in her chest. Anger, yes, but also confusion, and underneath that, something she refused to name. This man, this stranger, was doing something no one had ever done before. He was offering her gentleness in a room full of people expecting violence. He was asking instead of demanding. And somehow, that felt more threatening than any raised fist ever had. "I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting," she said, her voice low and hard. "I can see that." His hand extended toward her. Palm up, not grabbing or demanding, but offering. "I'm not trying to protect you. I'm trying to dance with you. There's a difference. You're making a fool of yourself." "Maybe so. But at least I'm doing it with intention." Billy made a sound of disgust. "This is ridiculous. If you won't fight her, then I'll..." James turned. And though he didn't raise his voice, something in his tone cut through Billy's bluster like a knife. "You'll what? Hit a woman? Show everyone in this room exactly what kind of man you are." He paused, letting the words settle. "Or maybe you'll go home, sleep off the whiskey, and wake up grateful you didn't do something you'd regret." Billy looked around the room, saw the expressions on the other men's faces, not support, but judgment, and something deflated in him. He muttered a curse and stumbled toward the door, his friends following. The room began to breathe again, conversations resuming in low murmurs. But James didn't move, his hand still extended toward Sierra, his expression patient and oddly kind. "I don't need your help," Sierra said, even as she realized how hollow the words sounded. "I know," James said, "but maybe I needed yours." She blinked, thrown off balance. "What? I'm new in town. Don't know many people yet. And there's something lonely about being somewhere unfamiliar, don't you think?" He lowered his hand but didn't step back. "I thought maybe we could be lonely together for a few minutes. No expectations. Just two people who might understand each other better than most." Sierra looked at this strange, quiet man who'd somehow turned a bar fight into something else entirely. She felt her carefully constructed armor cracking, just slightly, and it terrified her. "No," she said, and walked out of the saloon into the cool night air, her heart pounding with something that definitely wasn't fear, but felt just as dangerous. Behind her, through the saloon doors, she heard Big Tom say, "Wow, I'll be damned." And someone else responded, "Did you see her face? I ain't never seen Sierra Hart look like that before." Neither had Sierra. And that was exactly the problem. The changes in Sierra were subtle at first, small enough that most people in Copper Ridge didn't notice them. But Martha did, watching from her boarding house porch as Sierra smiled at something, James said, while they worked together mending the fence behind the trading post. And Big Tom noticed, seeing the way Sierra's shoulders relaxed when James walked into the saloon, no longer coiled and ready for a fight. The work had started innocently enough. A section of Sierra's fence had come loose during a windstorm, and James had offered to help repair it. She'd almost refused pride and habit warring with the practical knowledge that the job would go faster with two people. Practicality had won, though just barely. They worked side by side in the afternoon sun, James holding post steady while Sierra hammered, their movements developing an easy rhythm. He didn't try to take over or suggest she was doing it wrong. Didn't offer unsolicited advice or make jokes about women doing men's work. He just worked, competent and steady, and somehow that simple respect meant more than any grand gesture could have. "You're good with your hands," Sierra observed, watching him notch a post with practiced efficiency. Had to be. Grew up on a farm in Missouri. Before. He paused, and Sierra saw something shadow his face. "Before things changed. Asterisk. Before your wife died? Before that, even." He set the post in place, testing its stability. "I had a different life once. Different name, in a way. Different purpose." Sierra waited, sensing he needed space to find the words. It was something she'd learned from him, that silence could be an invitation rather than a wall. "I was a U.S. Marshal," James said finally, not looking at her. "For 8 years. Good at it too, by most measures. Fast with a gun. Faster with strategy. They sent me after the worst men in 3 territories, and I brought them in. Or brought them down when bringing them in wasn't an option." Sierra's hand stilled on the hammer. This quiet, gentle man had been a lawman, one of the hard men who dealt in violence and justice. "What made you stop?" "Elizabeth." His voice softened when he said her name. "We'd been married 6 months when she told me she was expecting. I was on assignment, chasing a gang of bank robbers through Wyoming territory. I should have been home with her, but I was doing what I thought was important, protecting people, upholding the law." He picked up another post, his movements mechanical, as if his hands needed something to do while his mouth formed difficult words. "She went into labor early. I was 3 days right away. By the time I got the message and made it back," his voice cracked, "I was too late. She was gone. The baby was gone. And all my righteous purpose, all my dedication to justice, meant nothing because I hadn't been there when the person I loved most needed me." Sierra moved closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. "That wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" He looked at her then, and his gray eyes were full of old grief. "I chose the badge over my family. I chose chasing bad men over being home with my wife. And she paid the price for my choice. You were doing your job. I was being a hard man in a hard world, adding to the violence instead of stepping back from it." He pulled something from his pocket, a folded letter, creased from much handling. "She wrote this while I was away, knowing I might not get it in time. A friend brought it to me after she was gone." He handed it to Sierra, and after a moment's hesitation, she unfolded it. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still readable. The handwriting was graceful, feminine. Each word carefully formed. "My dearest James," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I suspect things have not gone as we hoped. Please don't blame yourself. I knew who you were when I married you, a man dedicated to protecting others, even at cost to himself. But I want you to know something important. The world doesn't need more men who know how to deal death, even righteous death. It needs men who know how to preserve life, to show mercy, to choose peace, even when violence would be easier. You have that capacity in you, my love. I've seen it in the gentle way you hold me, in your patience with difficult people, in your willingness to listen before acting. Promise me that if I'm not here to remind you, you'll remember that your greatest strength isn't your gun, it's your heart. Be gentle, James, even when the world is cruel. Especially then. All my love, Elizabeth. Sierra's throat tightened as she read. She folded the letter carefully and handed it back. So you gave up the badge. I gave up violence, James corrected, tucking the letter back in his pocket. Or I'm trying to. Some days it's harder than others. That life marshal, lawman, the quick draw, it gets in your blood. You start to see every problem as something that needs to be confronted, every person as a potential threat. Elizabeth's death showed me what that worldview cost. But you can still fight, Sierra said. Your reputation people say you never lose. I don't lose because I don't fight, not the way they expect. He returned to the fence, back to work. I spent 8 years learning how to read people, how to anticipate their moves, how to stay 3 steps ahead. Those skills don't disappear just because I'm not wearing a badge anymore. But now I use them to avoid confrontation, not escalate it. They worked in silence for a while, Sierra processing this new understanding of the man beside her. James Cordell wasn't simply gentle by nature. He was gentle by choice, deliberately choosing peace over violence, despite being more than capable of the latter. That took a strength she was only beginning to comprehend. Why tell me this? She asked finally. Because you asked me once why I refused to fight you, James said. And the truth is, it's not about you not being worth fighting. It's about me knowing what violence costs, even when it's justified. Especially when it's justified. He met her eyes. I've hurt enough people, Sierra. I don't want to hurt anymore, even in self-defense, even when I'm right. I want to build things instead. Create things. Like this fence. He stopped, and something vulnerable crossed his face. Like whatever this is between us. Sierra felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling further. This man who'd seen the worst of humanity, who'd been shaped by violence and loss, had chosen tenderness. Had kept his dead wife's promise, even though it must have been agonizing. That took more courage than any fight she'd ever won. I'm not very good at building things, she admitted. I only know how to protect what's already there. Then maybe we can learn from each other. James offered her a small smile. You can teach me about standing firm, and I can teach you about letting people in. I don't know if I can do that. I didn't think I could give up the badge, he said. But here we are, both trying to be different than we were. Maybe that's enough to start with. The fence was finished by evening, straight and solid. A physical manifestation of what they'd built together that afternoon, something stronger than either could have made alone. As the sun set and they stood back to admire their work, Sierra felt the ring on her finger, her mother's ring catch the last light. Maybe her mother had been right to choose love. Maybe Elizabeth had been right to ask for gentleness. Maybe there was strength in vulnerability after all, or maybe Sierra was just a fool, letting her guard down for a man who would inevitably leave or disappoint or die, the way everyone she'd ever cared about eventually did. But looking at James in the golden evening light, at his patient hands and understanding eyes, she thought that maybe, just maybe, being a fool wasn't the worst thing she could be. Word spread through Copper Ridge the way it always did in small towns, quickly, quietly, and with embellishments that grew with each retelling. Sierra's heart was softening. The wild woman who'd never let a man close was spending time with the quiet stranger. They'd been seen riding together, working together, sitting on Martha's porch in the evening, talking like old friends. The reactions were mixed. Some townspeople were pleased, thinking Sierra deserved happiness after years of isolation. Others were skeptical, waiting for the inevitable explosion when two strong personalities collided. And a few, particularly Clayton Marsh and his circle, saw it as a threat to the natural order of things. Sierra noticed the change in how people looked at her. The wariness was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity, even hope. She'd been the town's cautionary. Tale for so long the bitter woman who chose anger over happiness that her transformation into something softer seemed to give others permission to believe in second chances. But transformation wasn't simple or straightforward. Sierra found herself pulled between two versions of herself, the armored fighter who'd kept her safe for 12 years, and this newer, more vulnerable person who was emerging in James's presence. The two selves warred constantly, leaving her exhausted and uncertain. One evening, as she closed up the trading post, she found herself staring at her father's old revolver hanging on the wall behind the counter. Thomas Hart had been a peaceful man by preference, but he'd known how to use that gun when necessary. It had saved his life more than once, right up until the night it couldn't save him anymore. Sierra took it down, feeling its familiar weight in her palm. How many times had she cleaned this weapon, checked its action, made sure it was ready for whatever threat might come? The gun had been her insurance policy, her final argument, a promise to herself that she would never be helpless again. But lately, she barely thought about it. When was the last time she'd even checked the ammunition? When had her first instinct stopped being to reach for a weapon? Martha found her like that, holding the revolver with a distant expression, lost in thought. Putting that away or getting ready to use it? Martha asked, settling into the chair by the stove. I don't know. Sierra turned the gun over in her hands. I used to know exactly what this meant, what I'd use it for. Now you're not sure you need it anymore. I'll always need it. The world doesn't stop being dangerous just because... Sierra stopped, uncertain how to finish that sentence. Just because you've let someone matter to you? Martha finished gently. Just because you're not facing everything alone anymore. Sierra set the gun on the counter, her movements careful. My father thought he could protect us with this. He was wrong. Your father did protect you, Martha corrected. He gave his life to keep you safe. That gun didn't fail him. The world did. Then what's the difference? If the world's still dangerous, still full of men who take what they want, the difference is that now you have a choice about how you face that danger. Martha leaned forward, her weathered hands clasped together. You can face it alone, armed and angry and isolated. Or you can face it with someone beside you, sharing the burden, watching your back while you watch his. What if I'm not strong enough? The question came out small, almost childlike. What if letting him close makes me weak? Oh, Sierra. Martha's eyes filled with gentle understanding. You've been strong alone for so long. You've forgotten what shared strength looks like. Two people together aren't weaker than one, they're doubled. You don't lose your power by letting someone in. You expand it. Sierra thought about the fence she and James had built, how much easier the work had been with two pairs of hands. She thought about the sunset they'd watched, how the beauty had somehow been magnified by having someone to share it with. She thought about the letter from Elizabeth asking James to choose gentleness, and how that choice hadn't made him weak but rather extraordinarily strong. I'm afraid, Sierra admitted, the words almost a whisper. Of course you are. Fear is the price we pay for caring. Martha stood slowly, her knees creaking. But here's what I've learned in my 70 years. You can be afraid and brave at the same time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something matters more than the fear. After Martha left, Sierra stood in the empty trading post for a long time, thinking about courage and fear, about strength and vulnerability, about all the ways she'd been wrong about what it meant to protect herself. She picked up her father's revolver one more time, felt its weight, acknowledged what it represented. Then she wrapped it carefully in oilcloth and placed it in the drawer beneath the counter, not thrown away. Not forgotten, but no longer the first thing she reached for when she felt threatened. That night, she visited her father's grave on the hill overlooking town. The wooden marker was weathered now, 12 years of sun and rain wearing away at the carved letters. She knelt beside it, pulling weeds that had grown up around the edges. "I met someone, Pa," she said quietly, feeling foolish talking to the dead but needing to say the words anyway. "He's different from the men you warned me about. She paused, searching for the right words. "He's strong in the ways you were strong. Gentle. Patient. He sees me, not just what I can do or what I'm useful for, but who I am underneath." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains. "I think Mama would have liked him," Sierra continued. "I think she would have understood why I'm so scared of this, and why I'm doing it anyway." She touched the ring on her finger, her mother's ring. "You always said she was braver than anyone gave her credit for. That choosing love took more courage than anything else. I'm starting to understand what you meant." She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked out over Copper Ridge in the moonlight. Somewhere down there, James was probably sitting on Martha's porch, sketching in his journal or just watching the night. Tomorrow, she'd see him again. And the day after that. And maybe, if she could find enough courage, for many days after that. The thought still terrified her. But for the first time in 12 years, it didn't make her want to run. That, Sierra thought as she walked back down the hill, might be what bravery actually looked like. The U.S. Marshal rode into Copper Ridge on a Tuesday morning, his horse lathered from hard travel, his face set with the grim determination of a man on official business. His badge caught the sunlight as he dismounted in front of the saloon. And within minutes, half the town had found reasons to be on the main street. Watching, Sierra was restocking shelves when Big Tom burst through her door, breathless and agitated. "There's a marshal asking about James," Tom said without preamble. "They're in the saloon now." Looked like they knew each other. Sierra's stomach dropped. She set down the canned goods she'd been organizing and grabbed her shawl. "What kind of questions?" "Didn't hear." "But Sierra." Tom caught her arm as she moved past him. The marshal looked angry. And James looked, I don't know, like a man seeing his past catch up to him. She found them at a corner table, 2 half-empty whiskeys between them, engaged in a conversation that looked civil but felt charged with tension. The marshal was older than James by a decade, weathered and hard-eyed, with the bearing of someone who'd spent his life enforcing law in lawless places. James saw her enter, and something flickered across his face, resignation, maybe, or regret. He stood as she approached, ever courteous, but his movements were stiff. "Sierra," he said, "this is Marshal Tom Bridger. Tom, this is Sierra Hart. She runs the trading post here." Bridger stood as well, touching his hat brim. "Ma'am." His eyes assessed her quickly, professionally, the way lawmen looked at everyone, cataloging, evaluating, filing away for future reference. "What's this about?" Sierra asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Old business," Bridger said, "between James and me. If it involves James, it involves me." She said it with a firmness that made both men look at her sharply. James and Bridger exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, James gestured to a chair. "You should sit down. I'll stand." "Please." Sierra. Something in his voice made her comply, though every instinct told her to run, to get away from whatever truth was about to shatter the fragile peace she'd found. Bridger cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old respect mixed with current disappointment. "James Cordell is the best marshal I ever trained. For 8 years, he was my right hand, the man I sent after the worst criminals in 3 territories. Fast, smart, and utterly dedicated to the law." Sierra looked at James, but he was staring at his whiskey glass, his jaw tight. "5 years ago," Bridger continued, "we were tracking a gang of outlaws who'd robbed a bank in Denver and killed 2 people in the process. Led by a man named Jack Crawford Vicious, unpredictable, and smart enough to stay ahead of us for 6 months. We finally cornered them in a town in Kansas. There was a shootout. The marshal's expression grew harder. James was the best shot I ever saw. In the chaos, Crawford used a civilian as a shield, a man named Daniel Brennan, who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. James took the shot anyway, believing he could hit Crawford without hitting Brennan. Sierra's blood went cold. But he missed. "No," Bridger said quietly. He made the shot he intended. Hit Crawford clean through the heart. But Brennan had moved at the last second, stepped in front of Crawford, maybe trying to run, maybe trying to protect the man. We never figured out why. The same bullet that killed Crawford went through him first. The saloon had gone quiet, everyone straining to hear without appearing to listen. Sierra felt the world tilting. Everything she thought she knew about James suddenly cast in a different light. Daniel Brennan was 32 years old, Bridget continued. His voice matter-of-fact in the way of men recounting tragedies they've seen too many times. Married. 2 young children. By all accounts, a good man. Crawford had been blackmailing him over some old debts, forcing him to cooperate. Brennan wasn't a criminal, he was a victim. "That's enough, Tom," James said quietly, but the marshal continued. James turned in his badge that day. Walked away from everything. "I've been looking for him on and off for 5 years. Not to arrest him. The shooting was ruled justified. Even though it destroyed James, but because his brother is coming." James finished, his voice hollow. "Daniel Brennan's brother." Bridger nodded. "Cole Brennan. He spent the last 5 years tracking you, James, and he's not interested in justice or legal proceedings. He wants revenge. Pure and simple." Sierra felt the words hit her like physical blows. James, gentle James, who carved wooden horses and chose peace over violence, had killed an innocent man. Not in malice, but the result was the same. A man was dead. Children had grown up without a father. And now that father's brother was coming to even the score. "When?" Sierra asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Best guess?" 3 days. Bridger looked at James with something like pity. "Cole's not alone. He's traveling with 2 men-hired guns with reputations. He's not planning to give you a fair fight." James finally looked up, and Sierra saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, but a bone-deep weariness. As if he'd been waiting for this moment for 5 years, and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. "I'll leave," James said. "Tonight. Lead them away from here." "You'll do no such thing," Sierra heard herself say, then wondered where the words had come from. After what she'd just learned, she should be pushing him out the door herself, grateful he'd be taking his dangerous past with him. But instead, she was standing, moving closer to him, her hand finding his shoulder. "Sierra, you don't understand," James began. "I understand plenty." She looked at Bridger. "This Cole Brennan, will he hurt anyone else if James leaves? Will he burn down the town looking for him?" Bridger hesitated. "Cole's single-minded, but desperate men do desperate things. Then James stays." The certainty in Sierra's voice surprised even her. "We face this together." "You don't owe me anything," James said, his eyes searching hers. "Especially not now. Not after. After I learned you're human?" Sierra cut him off. "After I learned you made a terrible mistake, and it's haunted you ever since. That doesn't change who you are now, James. It explains it." She thought of Elizabeth's letter, of the promise James had kept, even when it cost him everything. She thought of the wooden horse, carved with patient hands that refused to hurt anymore. She thought of all the ways he'd shown her that strength could be gentle, that courage could be quiet. "You killed a man," Sierra said, not flinching from the truth. "But you didn't murder him. There's a difference. Tell that to his children," James said bitterly. "I'm sure they hate you." Sierra's voice was matter-of-fact. "They have every right to. But that doesn't mean you don't have the right to defend yourself now." to build a life despite your mistakes. The saloon had gone completely silent now, everyone watching this drama unfold. In the corner, Sierra noticed Clayton Marsh, his face a mixture of calculation and barely concealed satisfaction. Bridger stood, preparing to leave. "I'll be staying at the boarding house. Cole will arrive in 3 days, maybe less. That gives us time to prepare." He looked at James with old affection, mixed with current resignation. "I can't make you stay, and I can't officially help you since you're not a marshal anymore. But unofficially," he paused, "Elizabeth would want you to fight for what you've built here. Don't let guilt destroy you twice." After the marshal left, Sierra and James sat in heavy silence. Finally, James spoke, his voice raw. "I understand if you want nothing more to do with me." Sierra thought about it, really thought about it. This man had killed someone, even accidentally. His past was violent and complicated. Being with him meant danger, meant facing down a vengeful brother with hired guns. Every logical reason screamed at her to walk away, to retreat behind her walls where it was safe. But she thought of her mother's ring on her finger, of her father's choice to protect her even knowing it might cost his life, of Martha's words about courage being more important than fear. She thought of how James had seen her, really seen her, when everyone else had just seen the wild woman who needed taming. "I'm not going anywhere," Sierra said firmly. "But we're going to need a plan." And James, she waited until he met her eyes. "No more secrets. If we're doing this, we do it with full truth between us." "No more secrets," he agreed. Outside, Clayton Marsh watched through the window, his mind already turning, seeing opportunity in chaos. If Cole Brennan wanted James Cordell dead, perhaps Clayton could help that along. And when the dust settled, maybe Sierra would finally understand that she needed a strong man like Clayton to protect her from the violence that men like James inevitably brought. He smiled to himself and headed toward his father's ranch. Time to make some plans of his own. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and revelation. James told Sierra everything, not just about Daniel Brennan's death, but about his entire life as a marshal. The men he'd tracked, the violence he'd witnessed and participated in, the slow erosion of his soul until Elizabeth's death had finally broken through the armor he built around his heart. They sat in the trading post after closing, the lamp burning low between them, and James opened himself completely. Sierra listened without interruption, watching his hands move as he spoke, seeing the weight he carried in every gesture. "I was good at it," James said, staring at those hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Being a marshal, I mean. Too good. I could read a criminal's next move before they made it, could track a man across 3 territories, could draw and fire faster than anyone I ever met." He looked up at her, and I told myself it was righteous, that I was protecting innocent people. But the truth is, I liked it. The chase, the victory, the reputation. I became the very thing I was supposed to be fighting against, a man who solved problems with violence. "But you stopped," Sierra said. "After Brennan, you chose differently." "I stopped because I finally saw what I'd become. Elizabeth had been trying to tell me for years, but I didn't listen. And then she was gone, and Brennan was dead. And I realized that my righteous violence had destroyed 2 families, my own and his." He pulled out his old marshal's badge from his pocket, the metal dull with age. "I've carried this for 5 years, not as a reminder of what I was, but as a reminder of what I refused to be." Sierra reached across the table and took the badge, turning it over in her fingers. It was surprisingly heavy, solid, and official. She thought about what it represented: authority, violence, justice. She thought about her own fighting gloves, the armor she wore to keep the world at bay. "We're not so different, you and I," she said quietly. "Both hiding behind metal and leather, both thinking strength meant never needing anyone, and both learning we were wrong." James covered her hand with his. "Sierra, If this goes badly, if Cole Brennan comes and I don't. She cut him off. We're not doing that. We're not saying goodbye before we've even fought. I just want you to know. He paused, searching for words. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. The possibility of a life beyond my mistakes. Whatever happens, you need to know that. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Martha entered, followed by Big Tom and Marshall Bridger. Behind them came a dozen more townspeople, the blacksmith, the doctor, several shopkeepers. Even some of the ranch hands who usually kept their distance from town politics. We've been talking, Martha said without preamble, and we've decided that if Cole Brennan wants trouble, he'll have to go through all of us. James stood, clearly moved. I can't ask you to do that. This is my fight. You're not asking, Tom rumbled. We're telling. You're part of this town now, whether you intended to be or not, and we protect our own. Bridger stepped forward, all business. If we're doing this, we need to do it smart. Cole's bringing hired guns, which means he's planning on overwhelming force. We need to control the situation, choose the ground, and make sure innocent people don't get caught in the crossfire. They spent the next hour planning. The town would appear normal, going about its business, but strategic people would be positioned where they could respond if violence erupted. The women and children would be moved to the church at the far end of town, safest from any shooting. Men who could handle guns would be armed, but instructed to hold fire unless absolutely necessary. The goal, Bridger emphasized, is to de-escalate. Cole wants James, not a massacre. If we can talk him down, show him that killing James won't bring his brother back, maybe we can end this without bloodshed. And if we can't, the blacksmith asked, then we make sure he knows the cost of violence in Copper Ridge is higher than he's willing to pay. After the others left to carry out their preparations, Sierra and James walked through the quiet town. It was late, well past midnight, and the streets were empty except for the occasional dog or night bird. They ended up at her father's grave on the hill, sitting side by side in the grass. I used to come here when things got hard, Sierra said, pulling her knees up. Talk to him like he could still hear me. Tell him about my day. Ask his advice. Probably just talking to myself, but it helped. I do the same with Elizabeth. James looked up at the stars, countless and bright in the clear Montana sky. Sometimes I imagine what she'd say about the choices I'm making. Whether she'd approve or tell me I'm still missing the point. What do you think she'd say about tomorrow? James was quiet for a long moment. I think she'd say that running would be easier, but staying is braver. That defending something you love is different from seeking violence. And that, his voice caught, that she'd be proud of me for finally finding something worth fighting for. Sierra turned to look at him, this man who'd stumbled into her life and quietly dismantled every defense she'd built. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, strong and gentle in equal measure. I was so sure I didn't need anyone, she said. Spent 12 years proving I could stand alone, that I didn't need protecting or partnership or love. And then you showed up and made me question everything I thought I knew about strength. You taught me just as much. James reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. You taught me that soft doesn't mean weak, that choosing peace doesn't mean being a coward. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see your scars. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, both knowing that tomorrow might end everything they'd just begun to build. Sierra thought about the wooden horse on her knitstand, the fence they'd built together, the sunset rides and quiet conversations. She thought about all the moments of gentle transformation, the slow opening of a heart she'd thought permanently sealed. James, she said finally, if we survive tomorrow, when we survive tomorrow, he corrected gently. When we survive, she amended, I want to keep doing this. building something together. I want to stop being so afraid of losing that I never really live. Is that a proposal, Miss Hart?" There was warmth in his voice, gentle teasing that made her smile despite everything. "Maybe it is, Mr. Cordell." She looked at him directly. "I'm not good at pretty words or romantic gestures, but I know that I want to wake up and see your face. I want to watch you carve ridiculous wooden animals and listen to your stories about places I've never been. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like." James cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "Then that's exactly what we'll do. After tomorrow, after this is over, we'll start building a real life together." They kissed then, gentle and deep, a promise and a prayer all at once. When they finally pulled apart, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon. "We should get some rest," James said. Though neither of them moved, "I don't think I can sleep." "Me neither." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek. "But we can sit here together, watch the sun come up, face the day as it comes." So they sat, two broken people who'd found healing in each other, waiting for the dawn and whatever it bring. Below them, Copper Ridge stirred to life shopkeepers opening their doors, horses being saddled, the normal routines of a town preparing for an abnormal day. Martha stepped out onto her porch and looked up at the hill, seeing their silhouettes against the brightening sky. She smiled, said a prayer for their safety, and went to make coffee. Whatever happened today, those two had found something worth fighting for. That was victory enough, regardless of the outcome. At the edge of town, Cole Brennan and his two hired guns made camp. Cole was a hard man, weathered by 5 years of grief and the single-minded pursuit of revenge. He tracked James Cordell across half the Western Territories, never quite catching up, always one town behind. But now, finally, his search was over. He pulled out a small wooden cross from his pocket, handmade and worn smooth from constant handling. His nephew had carved it, the son who'd grown up without a father because of James Cordell's bullet. The boy was 9 now, old enough to ask questions about why his papa never came home, old enough to need a man's guidance that Cole couldn't properly provide. "Tomorrow," Cole said to the wooden cross, a promise and a threat. "Tomorrow, Danny, I'll make this right." His hired guns checked their weapons, professional and cold. They didn't care about justice or revenge or grieving brothers. They cared about the money Cole had promised them and getting out of Copper Ridge alive. But Cole cared about nothing except the reckoning that was now less than a day away. 5 years of pain and rage and loss were about to be answered. James Cordell would pay for what he'd taken from the Brennan family. And if others got in the way, well, Cole had stopped caring about collateral damage about the same time. His brother was laid in the ground. The sun rose over Copper Ridge, bright and clear, illuminating a town holding its breath, waiting for violence or redemption or some combination of both. And on the hill above it all, two people held each other and gathered the courage to face whatever the day would bring. The question hung in the air, weighted with 5 years of grief and rage and loss. Cole stared at James, at the man who'd killed his brother. And Sierra could see the moment his resolve began to crumble. But then a new voice cut through the tension. "Well, this is touching," Clayton Marsh said, stepping out from behind the saloon, his own gun drawn and aimed at James. "But I'm getting tired of waiting for someone to do what needs doing." Sierra's blood went cold. "Clayton, what are you doing?" "Protecting you, sweetheart." Clayton's smile was ugly, triumphant. "Protecting this whole town from a killer. Cordell here has brought nothing but trouble since he arrived. Time someone had the courage to end it." "Put the gun down," Bridger commanded, his hand moving to his own weapon. "I don't think so, Marshal." Clayton gestured with his pistol. "This is between me and Cordell. Man to man. The way it should be." Sierra stepped forward, positioning herself between Clayton and James. The only thing between you and James is your jealousy. This has nothing to do with justice or protecting anyone. You just can't stand that I chose him over you. Chose him?" Clayton's face flushed with anger. "You chose a killer, a coward who won't even defend himself. What kind of choice is that?" "The kind that takes actual courage to make," Sierra shot back. "The kind you'll never understand because you think strength is about forcing people to bend to your will." Clayton's gun shifted to point at her. "Move aside, Sierra. This is your last warning." "No." She stood her ground, every inch the wild woman Copper Ridge had always known, but now fighting for something beyond herself. "You want to shoot him? You go through me first." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Clayton's finger tightened on the trigger, rage overcoming whatever sense he might have had. Sierra saw it happening, saw the decision form in his eyes, and knew she'd made a terrible miscalculation. But then James moved, faster than she'd ever seen him move, pulling her aside as Clayton fired. The bullet meant for Sierra's chest struck James's shoulder instead, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. The street erupted in chaos. Cole Brennan, watching this scene of threatened violence against an unarmed woman, made his choice. He drew his gun with practiced speed and shot Clayton's weapon from his hand before the man could fire again. The pistol went flying, and Clayton howled in pain and surprise. Bridger and several townsmen rushed forward, pinning Clayton to the ground. The hired guns that had come with Cole made no move to interfere. Smart enough to know when a job had gone sideways and wanting no part of attacking it, U.S. Marshal Sierra dropped beside James, her hands immediately going to his wounded shoulder. Blood seeped through his shirt, but the wound looked clean, the bullet having passed through the fleshy part without hitting bone or major vessels. "You fool," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You absolute fool. Why would you do that?" "Because I love you," James said simply, wincing as she pressed her shawl against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Because everything I've done wrong, every mistake I've made, letting you get shot wasn't going to be one of them." The town doctor came running, his bag in hand, immediately taking over Sierra's first aid efforts. As he worked, Sierra looked up to find Cole Brennan standing over them, the wooden cross clutched in one hand, his gun hanging loose in the other. "I can't forgive you," Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe ever. What you did to my brother, the hole it left in our family, that's not something I can just let go of." "I know," James said through gritted teeth as the doctor probed the wound. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I won't become a murderer to avenge him." Cole looked at the cross in his hand and back at James. "Daniel was better than that. He wouldn't want me destroying my own soul for his sake." And when that coward, he gestured toward Clayton, now being dragged toward the jail. "When he tried to shoot an unarmed woman, I saw what revenge really looks like. It's not justice. It's just more violence, more pain, more people getting hurt who don't deserve it." He knelt down so he was eye level with James. "You're going to have to live with what you did. Every day, for the rest of your life. That's your punishment. And it's worse than anything I could do to you." He stood, pocketing the cross. "I'm going home to my nephew. Going to tell him his uncle tried to get justice and found something better mercy. Maybe that's what Daniel would have wanted all along." Cole walked to his horse, mounted, and looked back one last time. "You take care of her," he said, nodding toward Sierra. "Any man willing to take a bullet for someone, that's not a killer. That's someone trying to be better than he was." Then he rode out of Copper Ridge, his hired guns following, leaving behind the revenge he'd spent 5 years pursuing. The townspeople emerged from their positions, gathering around as the doctor finished bandaging James's shoulder. "You'll live," the doctor pronounced, "though you're going to have one terrible scar and a stiff shoulder for a few weeks." "Small price," James said, reaching for Sierra's hand with his good arm. She took it, holding tight, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she let herself believe They might actually have a future. 6 weeks later, Sierra stood in front of the trading post, watching as James hung a new sign above the door. His shoulder was still healing, the movements careful and deliberate, but he'd refused her offer of help. Some things, he'd said, a man needed to do himself. The sign read, Heart and Cordal Trading Company, in freshly painted letters, with a small carved horse worked into the design. James's artistic touch on what was otherwise a simple declaration of partnership. "What do you think?" he asked, climbing down from the ladder. "I think it's perfect," Sierra said, and meant it. The sign represented everything they built together: equal partnership, shared strength, a future they'd chosen despite every reason to walk away. The town had settled into a new normal after the confrontation. Clayton Marsh had been charged with attempted murder and sent to territorial prison, his father disowning him in shame. Marshal Bridger had stayed for a week, helping sort out the legal complications, before heading back to Denver with a promise to visit. And the townspeople of Copper Ridge, having witnessed the courage of two scarred souls choosing love over fear, had embraced James and Sierra's relationship with surprising warmth. Martha appeared on the porch of her boarding house, waving them over. "I've made pie," she called. "Apple, the way you both like it." They walked over together, James's hand finding Sierra's as naturally as breathing. On Martha's porch, they sat in the rocking chairs and ate pie while the afternoon sun painted everything gold. "I got a letter today," James said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From Cole Brennan." Sierra set down her fork, surprised. "What did it say?" "Not much. Just that he's doing all right. His nephew's asking questions about his father, and Cole's been telling him the truth, that Daniel was a good man who made mistakes but tried to do right in the end." James stared at the letter. He thanked me, in his way, said that learning to live with grief instead of feeding it with rage has made him a better uncle. A better man. "That's good," Martha said softly. "Healing, even when it's hard, is always good." He also said, James paused, emotion catching in his throat. "He said he hopes I find the happiness his brother would have wanted for me. That Daniel wouldn't have wanted his death to ruin another life." Sierra squeezed his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence. Three people who understood that healing wasn't a straight line, that forgiveness was complicated, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply keep living, keep trying, keep choosing kindness even when the world gave you every reason not to. That evening, Sierra and James rode out to the ridge where they'd shared their first sunset. The valley spread below them, peaceful and beautiful, the mountains standing eternal watch over the land. "I have something for you," James said, pulling a small box from his saddlebag. Sierra's heart quickened as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band, not ornate, not expensive, but carefully chosen and clearly meaningful. "It's not fancy," James said, "but it's honest, like us. Like what we're building together." He took her hand, and she noticed he was trembling slightly. "Sierra Hart, you've taught me that strength comes in forms I never imagined. That vulnerability is its own kind of courage. That two broken people can build something whole if they're willing to try. Will you marry me?" Sierra looked at this man who'd ridden into her life and quietly dismantled every wall she'd built. She thought about the wooden horse on her knit-stand, the fence they'd repaired together, the way he'd stepped between her and the bullet without hesitation. She thought about her mother's ring on her finger, about her father's belief that love was worth the risk, about Martha's wisdom that courage meant choosing what mattered more than fear. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger, next to her mother's band, and they sat together as the sun set. Two rings symbolizing two kinds of love, the one she'd inherited and the one she'd chosen for herself. The wedding happened a month later in the small church at the edge of town. Martha cried, as did several other townswomen who'd watched Sierra's transformation from isolated fighter to woman in love. Big Tom served as James's best man, and even the minister commented that he'd never seen two people look at each other with quite such understanding and hard-won joy. After the ceremony, there was a celebration in the street's simple frontier fair, with music and dancing and laughter. Sierra, who'd once said she didn't dance, waltzed with her husband under the stars, while the town that had once feared her applauded her happiness. As the evening wound down and the townspeople drifted home, Sierra and James stood together outside their newly shared home, the rooms above the trading post that they'd spent weeks preparing together. "Are you scared?" James asked, his arms around her waist. "Terrified," Sierra admitted, "but also hopeful, also happy, also a dozen other things I never let myself feel before." "Me too." He kissed her forehead gently. "But we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do." They went inside, and Sierra paused to look at the mantel where two objects sat side by side: her father's pocket watch, still stopped at 8:47, and the wooden horse James had carved, one representing an ending, one a beginning. Together, they told the story of a life built from loss, of strength forged in gentleness, of two people who'd learned that the wildest heart didn't need taming. It just needed understanding. Outside, the sign reading Heart and Cordell Trading Company swung gently in the night breeze, promising partnership and equality and a future built on foundations stronger than fear. In Copper Ridge, people would talk for years about the wild woman and the quiet cowboy, about the love that had bloomed in the unlikely soil, about the courage it took to choose softness in a hard world. But Sierra and James weren't thinking about stories or reputations or what others might say. They were thinking about tomorrow and the day after that, and all the days stretching ahead of them, days they'd face together, building a life from honesty and patience and the understanding that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone hold your hand. Sometimes the wild woman no one could marry just needed to meet the man who understood that taming was never the answer. Understanding was. Partnership was. Love was. And in the end, that made all the difference.